Kia ora, everybody. This is an absolute pleasure. I've got Peter Ballerstedt. Did I say that right?
You did.
Wonderful. Who is a agronomist and meat industry researcher or meat agricultural researcher?
I'm a forage agronomist.
Forage agronomist.
And a ruminant nutritionist by training.
Yeah.
But I've developed a real interest and done a bit of study in the area of diet, health, and human nutrition, especially as animal products impact that.
Wonderful. And before we dive deep, because it's going to be a deep dive and a little bit of a challenge to a lot of people, so we'll take things slow, and you're great at explaining things, so there'll be no problem there getting the message across. But we've been talking in the week because we didn't know if this was going to align for the time frame today, and you were more on the coast of Oregon, and you sent me a wonderful photo. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I was just up in the northwest corner of the state, essentially, in a town called Tillamook, where we have a lot of pasture-based, grass-based berries, a lot of confinement as well, and so we were talking to some very
Lovely. And one of the things that often comes up is nutritional science, and we put quotations around that. What stumbled you across that maybe the information out there is not a full picture and might be generalized far too much, and when it comes to an individual, there might be some different choices that you might need to make? What sparked that interest for you coming from your own area of research?
Well, so basically, the short version is that in 2007, I finally realized that I was 51-year-old balding, obese, pre-diabetic. And then I started reading some books and blogs and what have you, got introduced to many people that you would recognize, and basically reversed all those conditions except for the balding bit. By following a diet that's essentially 180 degrees different from what we've been told is a healthy diet. So in the course of kind of going through that process, I started to get kind of first mad because the industries I've been trained to support have been slandered. They've been blamed for chronic diseases, right? Red meat consumption causes cancer, red meat consumption causes heart disease. Full fat dairy makes you fat, gives you diabetes, gotta eat. And the more I read, the more I experienced personally, I just became convinced that just wasn't true. And then I started trying to help people understand that, as well as some of the realities about how our food is produced, because I think that there's a certain amount of mythology involved in that. Yes?
Yeah. And I heard you talk on, Sean, that your wife was sort of edging you in the right way.
Oh, well, yes. So, basically she started on the journey about 5 years before I did. And so basically, but she was wise enough to know that, well, her approach was to say, this is what I'm going to eat. What would you like to eat? So rather than, try to force somebody into doing something they're not ready to. And then 5 years after she got started, I basically realized that what I was doing wasn't working. The weight was just steadily increasing. And then I learned about something called pre-diabetes. And yeah, that sounds like me. No, I don't want to go into diabetes. So I found books like Protein Power,
Mm-hmm.
Michael and Mary Van Eads, and Gary Taubes' book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, came out like next year or so. And so very quickly, these resources became available.
Lovely. And so what was your paradigm prior to that? Was it grain-based, or you work with ruminants. How did the two of those fit together in your sort of paradigm of what food is?
Well, I guess they really didn't fit together well because I believe that low fat, I believe the pasta and the bread and the chicken, those were, and then, watch how much you eat and, those sorts of things, were the key to making progress. But I became convinced pretty quickly that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and so I guess you're one of the lucky ones because it's always said that if you can capture somebody in this pre-diabetic realm, and even better if you could catch them before then, before the blood sugar gets into an arbitrary figure, if you can catch them when their markers are starting to go a little bit AWOL, that you've got the best chance of motivation. Like you said, you didn't want to enter that into the diabetic category. Do you have any sort of comment of that about what your motivation was like at that stage?
Well, part of it was the 36-inch waist jeans were getting tight, so I was going to have to get some bigger ones, and I really didn't want to go that way. And I wasn't happy with how I felt. And then as I learned about the relationship between the prediabetes, metabolic syndrome, and my increased risk for a whole number of diseases, I'd like to not go down that path if I can avoid it. There's a history of cancer in my family. I'd rather not go that way if I can
Mm.
avoid it. So these things, and part of the experience of anyone who's tried some of the low fat, low calorie, exercise, whatever, they are likely to have found small results that didn't last for very long.
Mm.
Not for much, not for long, very kind of short version. And I certainly had, I'd lose a pound, I'd gain two, I'd lose two, I'd gain another one back, kind of bouncing around and not really making any progress. And then there's the question of what was happening with blood sugar was tending to go up, the HDL cholesterol was going down. So all of those were pretty marginal markers for me. And again, I wanted to avoid what was completely predictable in terms of humming attractions, you should say, likely outcomes and negative health.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's when somebody comes in and they've been diabetic 10 years and they've still got a A1C in Australia, they use the old unit, so five or even in the low sixes. I sort of say, well, you're doing all right, and you're still on just metformin, so that's okay. And hey, you might actually be protecting yourself from a few other things by taking that metformin, but you know, it's such a revelation to them that hey, they don't actually need to go down that track of 10 years or 15 years. Things basically pack up and leave, and you're left with a whole bunch of greater health problems. And to tell them that diabetes is reversible, that excitement comes back to their eyes. So was that ever told to you, diabetes is reversible?
No, no, and since I never got to that stage, I never was subjected to that kind of quote unquote education.
Yeah.
So, and frankly, I've gotten tired of talking with some healthcare people. It's almost like I want to carry a copy of Why We Get Fat, What to Do About It, or one of the other many excellent books into the exam room with me and say, "Have you read this? Okay, read this, and then I'll come back." I've had some frustrating conversations. We have a system in the United States where certain health insurance firms will have programs with health coaching, and so you fill out the form with the numbers, tell them what you eat, etc., and then you get a phone call in a little while from somebody that's going to tell you what you need to do to improve your health.
Mm.
And I try to remember that this is probably somebody working for minimum wage in a call center that's doing this work. So I'll try not to abuse them too much, but I try to get them to put some note in the file about please update your information. It doesn't reflect current science. So some of that, you know, it's just I could do without that frustration, but maybe it'll do some good.
Yeah, and on the flip side, the venture capital side of things, we've got Verita Health, which is going along with, and creating some of the new science, and that feedback mechanism is not what I recalled I ate this week. It's, oh, your blood sugar has gone up, your ketones have gone down. How are you feeling? How did you sleep? What did you have for dinner yesterday? What did you have for lunch yesterday? What exercise did you do? You know, it's so much more tapped in, and it's going to be an interesting model to see how far that can go. But now we're already seeing some insurers jump on board, and the business insurance doesn't have to pay if the results aren't there. So, you know, they're confident.
And the results have been so encouraging. Like you said, it's reversible. It's a condition that doesn't. Well, what does Dr. Unwin talk about? Lifestyle medicine versus lifelong medication.
Yeah,
You know, here's your choice. Which would you like?
yeah,
And as he says, nobody offers that choice. I mean, nobody presents it as, okay, I'm going to start you on a course of medication that you're probably going to be on an increasing, you know, um, series of prescriptions for the rest of your life. And, you know, life isn't going to be, or you could do this, which again involves eating foods that you've been told not to eat, and you know, maybe developing the habit of a little physical activity, and hey presto, you might find that condition no longer requires treatment. Um, it's it seems to me that medicine has gotten very, very good at treating the acute conditions. So I'm very grateful that if I were to break my leg or get in an accident, that you know there's crisis care available to treat that. We do that very well. We've done a good job in infectious disease controls, and that's marvelous. You know, you read about some of the experience that people had of some kind of disease coming in and wiping out families. Just you know, it's what happened. That's not part, but we're not so good at dealing with the chronic illness.
mm-hmm.
And that's currently chronic illnesses are the largest killer of humans in the world by a long way.
Yeah, and you know that's another great piece of content you put up the other day on your Instagram and Twitter was that graph of all these things that we've managed to curtail, and then there's lifestyle diseases way up, and you know diabetes is creeping up, and you know heart disease is still a long way off. But if you talk to people like David or Ivor Cummins, you know maybe the insulin resistance is behind this, and it's just an earlier manifestation, and hey, if we can curtail one, we might be curtailing the others.
It certainly makes sense to me. I use that analogy of a rain barrel, you know, a wooden barrel that has different length staves. So the short stave of the barrel is the one that's going to set the volume of that
Yeah.
barrel. It can't hold any more water than the shortest stave. I learned that first in soil fertility. So the idea is if phosphorus is limiting, then putting on a bunch of nitrogen isn't going to do you any good. Might actually do you some harm. Certainly is going to cost you money. It's not applying your resources to the limiting factor. And I think that hyperinsulinemia at this point, insulin resistance, those are the short staves in our public health. And until somebody can convince me that they've done a good job of accounting for that and correcting for that and talking about some of these other issues, which may well have an effect, I don't think they're likely to have an effect that we can measure at this point. And in the United States, the reality is that over 50%
Mm.
60% of adult Americans have one or more chronic illnesses, and that 80% of adult Americans don't enjoy metabolic health. That's entirely about lifestyle intervention. It's entirely about diet, a species-appropriate diet, we might say.
Mm.
So until we've made progress on getting that more widely examined, applied, accepted, these other factors that people like to spend a lot of time worrying about, I really don't think we're likely to see the economic response from those until we've taken care of the short stage.
Yeah, absolutely. You speak about species appropriate there. Why don't we eat grass?
Because we're not ruminants.
Yeah.
Because a couple reasons. One is grass is primarily fiber and various carbohydrates, structural carbohydrates, and we are not equipped to digest those. We don't, and nor does any other vertebrate produce cellulase, which is the enzyme necessary to break apart the glucose units that are linked together that make up cellulose. And then we could also spend a little time talking about the nitrogen-containing compounds that are in grass are mostly not protein. Now, a ruminant, on the other hand, is technically it's a pre-gastric fermenter. It has a multi-compartmented stomach. It can ingest this high-fiber, low-protein, and poor-quality protein diet. It hosts a multitude, billions of bacteria, fungi, protozoa that live within this oxygen-free environment, anaerobic environment. So in that environment, that plant material ferments. It also gets rechewed periodically. They bring up a cud, they chew it, they re-swallow it. So that's the fermentation process. So that's breaking down that material until it can pass out of that first two compartments of the ruminant's stomach digestive system. Unlike ours, which is a flow through, theirs has to get broken down sufficiently before it can leave. So that's a mechanical, that's a microbiological process. At the same time, there are sugars and starches that are part of grass or any other forage. So the fiber and then those non-structural carbohydrates get converted by the microorganisms, used for their own energy, but they also produce volatile fatty acids. Those volatile fatty acids are absorbed by the host animal, the cow, the sheep, the deer. And what ends up happening is a cow eats a diet that might be, well, it has to be certainly less than 6, some say less than 5% crude fat as a diet, total diet. And yet 70 or 80% of her energy is going to come from those volatile fatty acids that are formed in the rumen as part of that breakdown of the fiber entirely by the microorganisms. The nitrogenous materials that come in, the microorganisms will use those to build more of themselves. So they make microbial protein out of those materials, and then the microbes are themselves digested by the host animal. So the really important ecological niche, if you compared us or other monogastrics to a ruminant, there are essential amino acids in our diet or in any other monogastric's diet. There's no such thing as an essential amino acid in a ruminant's diet. So that's a really important ecological function, is they can use that non-protein nitrogen that in some plant foods can be almost half of the protein is actually in non-protein nitrogen sources. The ruminants can take that through this microbial process and digest the microbes themselves and format protein. There are essential fatty acids in monogastric diet, our diet, but apparently there's not in the ruminant diet. And then there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate in our diet. There are two forms that are essential for proper function. You have to have both the structural and the non-structural. They have to have fiber. They also have to have sugars and starches and other non-structural carbohydrates in their diet in order for the rumen to function properly. So there's this wonderful relationship, this meshing, and it makes sense. The grasses are some of the oldest plants, the grasslands. Ruminants evolved and take advantage of those. The center of origin for many of the ruminants is in Africa, and they were able to utilize the grassland resource as a food resource, and then human beings ultimately come on the scene, act as endurance hunters initially, utilizing the ruminants as a food resource. So I think it's something like 20 million years ago. The 6 existing ruminant families were essentially existing. And then it took a long time for humans to show up. So there's this wonderful meshing, and one of the arguments is, well, if we got rid of ruminants, we'd have all this more food to feed humans, and it's just not true. The ruminant animals are increasing the quantity and the quality of humanity's food supply.
I know I've just come in from crushing up some eggs on my eggshells on my garden, and I've been putting remaining bone broth bones and whatever little fatties and chicken meat that was left over from that mix in my garden, and I've turned this sandy little box of sand basically and stones into this brown and beautiful moisture holding soil that's produced some spinach and lettuce and basil, which when I first looked at it I thought that'll never grow and it's too hot here, and it's almost going to seed now that we've been away for a fortnight. You speak about what's the limiting factor of your soil, and then this amazing biodiversity that comes from a ruminant stomach, and then eventually will end up on the land, and you see things like mushrooms sprouting up, and like we used to have some sheep where we used to live, and at certain times of the year there'd be all these mushrooms across the paddock, and how not only is the ruminant allowing us to progress as a species, but it's also allowing the planet in that certain area that's being grazed and turned over to thrive again and turn over again. And that was one of the considerations I had when in New Zealand they were looking at culling a large number of tar, and they were sort of saying that it was threatening this, it's called the Mount Cook daisy, the species that grows in the high country. And ironically, one of the hunting shows put up this photo of a massive mob of tar and all these Mount Cook daisies. So it's not a complete picture, is it?
I mean, the grasses as a plant have a rather unique structure, and basically grassland, to remain productive and healthy, either gets grazed or it gets burned.
Yeah.
I think grazing is a better option. And that builds and certainly maintains, and we're getting data showing, depending on the condition, surprising increases in soil carbons and soil organic matter. It's organic matter that holds far more moisture per unit weight than the mineral component of soils, acts as a tremendous reservoir for positively charged elements in the soil, so fertility. And then we're learning more and more about all the micro and macrobiological life that takes place United States, we've had a period of, well, I visited one state recently, back in mid-January, North Dakota, and the history of farming there goes back 120 years, maybe something like that. And it was prairie. People came in. The first settlers, European settlers, basically survived by collecting bones off the prairie and taking them to railheads where they'd be hauled off to Chicago and processed. And as a result of this visit, I got introduced to a soil fertility professor from North Dakota State University who gave this talk, the history of phosphorus export from North Dakota. What they're able to show is the first settlers came in and they only knew how to farm. They farmed back east or in Europe, and they had, primitive seeding equipment. They had non-adapted varieties. They had no fertilizer. They came in. They just beat up the sod, worked it down until it was just a very fine powdery soil. They seeded their wheat into that. Well, there's significant wind, and so they started having wind erosion almost immediately. When they were able to harvest a yield, according to this presentation, he was saying that the yields reported from then are not that different from an average yield today, with all the advances that have been made. Back in the 50s and 60s, a lot of work was done to map the soils of the United States, and they can now go back to those same sites where they originally characterized that soil and look at it. So we talk about layers in the soil profile. So the A horizon is the very top, most organic matter, then a B horizon, and then down to a C horizon, and then under that is usually barren material. So something to give you an idea, and they can go to these same places and see the top of the C horizon is now 19 inches closer to the soil surface than it was back in the 60s or 50s. Soil. So what that means is they've lost all that soil due to wind erosion, due to oxidation of organic matter, water erosion, what have you. They've lost that much material, and he said that if they could get to zero soil loss and continued current phosphate application rates, it would take them 200 years to catch up to where they were in terms of fertility level in 1890. So whatever we're going to do to produce food is going to have an impact on the environment. Just us being there has an impact on the environment. Might have to have some form of agriculture. I make the argument that without ruminants in our agricultural system, we can't have sustainable agricultural systems without ruminants. We can't feed today's world without ruminant animal agriculture. And ruminant animal agriculture actually has advantages over other forms of food production. And that's before we've ever really taken on board, well, are animal products more valuable in our diet than the plant products? So should that guide what we're going to produce? Some of the conversations and arguments, discussions that happen around things like sustainability. Unfortunately, sustainability is still informed by the conventional wisdom of what a healthy diet looks like. And so they have yet to allow the whole conversation about metabolic illness and the enormous cost that has on society that has not yet been brought into the conversation. So we're learning more about greenhouse gas emissions. We're learning more about carbon sequestration. And as we learn more, we actually find that, even just looking at that bit, that if we would look at actual essential nutrient production rather than pounds or bushels or what have you, and look at the footprint in terms of essential nutrients, ends up being similar to the impact of crop farming.
Mm.
So that's before we've ever gotten to this vision of our health in terms of metabolic state. So I think that as we do more and more of this, we'll see more and more that no, in fact, what we need is we need more ruminant animal agriculture. We need better management of our grasslands. We need to reintegrate grazing animals into our cropping systems. We're seeing more and more of that happening. We're seeing more interest in agroforestry systems where we can grow grass and trees on the same ground, and of course we're going to graze the grass. And even in parts that I got to visit Brazil in June, and what I saw there is they're not just doing grass and trees, they're also then going to come in every once in a while and take the grass out and grow soybeans.
Mm.
So now they have a cropping rotation in between the trees. And of course, they're using trees that mature very quickly. And, it's a tropical environment. You can do wonderful things there. But they're finding if they don't keep the ground covered, their soil quality degrades very, very quickly. So it was interesting to see that integrated livestock cropping systems work that's going on there. And we can do that in many, many more places around the world.
Yeah, and it's not a one; it's a whole picture. I know in New Zealand, a lot of the people will say, "Well, hey, we need to plant out this hill country. We need to plant this out," and then you actually look at the reality of it, and a lot of the native forest in New Zealand is actually put aside by hill country farmers, and when you go for the short rotation trees, as soon as you harvest them, there's massive losses of soil, and the water goes brown for a bit because of that runoff and things. And you mentioned at the start of that North Dakota story about collecting the bones, and I guess my perspective on life is that in the bottom of New Zealand, there we've got a place probably 20 minutes up the road called Lime Hills, and there's a famous limestone in New Zealand called Oamaru stone, which is another township, and it's this beautiful limestone that's been used for construction. But again, the lime works are scattered amongst the country, probably because of how coastal it is. But if you actually, I guess, basic geology, you go back, and that limestone comes from the shellfish and the shell bones and the shells themselves, and it's so great to be spread on the country. And lots of the hill country farming in New Zealand is owed to the fact that we've got helicopters and skilled plane drivers to drop lime on the hills and make these once tussock areas green and beautiful and suitable, or more suitable for sheep and even some beef cattle to grow and prosper, as opposed to maintenance on a tussock feed. What is it about this lime that's so rewarding back to the soil and to the grass that wants to grow?
Well, a lot of the leguminous plants, those plants that form a specialized relationship with yet another microbe that infects the roots of the plant and fixes atmospheric nitrogen. So, what is it? 70% of the atmosphere is N2 gas, but it's essentially inert as far as we're concerned. These bacteria can actually convert that into a form that the plant can utilize. And because it's in the plant, it can then be available to the animals. It can then cycle through the soil until ultimately one fate of it is that it can be reconverted back into nitrogen gas and essentially enter the cycle that way. So the lime raises the soil pH, provides some calcium, depends on the source, could also provide some other minerals. That's necessary for legumes to grow and support nitrogen fixation. And then we can bring grazing animals into those areas. And by managing those animals, if you get a lot of them in an area for a relatively short period of time, then their dung and their urine gets deposited evenly. So you get even nutrient cycling. And then that favors later introduction of some more productive grasses. The animals themselves will kind of tear up the tussock a bit and lead to more productive species coming to cover that area.
Mm. And you spoke about legumes there. One of my patients in a rural area in New Zealand, deer have a pretty checkered past because they're an introduced species that's been classed as a pest, and so when it comes to farming them, I think they still get the same minimal status. Chuck them on the back blocks and let them grow, and we'll do something with when they're mature. And this guy's a sheep farmer. He said the most important thing for the hill country is these subterranean clovers, and it goes exactly what you said there. That those legumes to boost or enhance the nitrogen and raise that fertility.
They also produce very high quality feed, so
yeah.
Animals get a lot of energy from the feed. Subclover is an interesting plant, and it essentially plants itself. It plants its seed into the ground. And in parts of Australia, we've used some of the higher rainfall lines of subclover here in Western Oregon for a long time. But in some places, my understanding is that where wool production, you're not really trying to be on growing animal. You're just trying to maintain mature animals. You actually push the sheep hard enough that they're actually eating birds, which is grazing pretty close. But that's another advantage of the ruminant and that plant in that environment where really what else can you grow to maybe dry land rotation, fallow year, try to grow cereals. But it's there's so much that's going on here, and it's so poorly appreciated by most of the consuming public. Some countries, New Zealand is an area that has been of interest to me for as long as I've been introduced to forage agriculture. It may have had something to do with a major professor who was from the South Island. But I finally got to visit. It's a wonderful place. I'd love to go back. They had a product in a store, and I got all kinds of excited. I've lost the picture since, but it was brilliant.
So what was that?
Brilliant.
Yeah.
It was just, and it was there in the meat case, and it just beef tallow and lamb tallow that was here for roasting and doing whatever, but you don't see that in the United States stores.
Oh man.
Maybe once upon a time you did, but and maybe in some specialty stores you can see it now, where people are getting on to, animal fats being okay to use in cooking, and actually having advantages. But so I'm sitting there trying to take a picture of this, and the clerk comes up to me, "Can I help you?"
Yeah.
I'm leaving soon. Tourists don't give me any attention.
It's amazing you say that, and it takes us back to the story of the narrative around food, and that myself growing up, we used to save the pork fat, we used to save the beef fat and put it in a jar and use it again, and then all of a sudden we didn't, and I didn't have a clue why, but it just would have been the health narrative that, hey, that's bad, and it's amazing how quick that market has come back to Australasia. Pete Evans might have something to do with it. There's plenty of people out there who are in the food industry and in this ancestral way of life, and dripping tallow and lard again in the supermarkets. There's blocks of lard, there's blocks of tallow now, and I don't know if I'm just seeing it because I'm aware of it, and maybe it was always there, but hey, it's definitely there in the supermarket now.
No, again, 2007, 2002 when Nancy started. There's a lot more options available to us today than there were then, and we've gone through, a bit of an evolution in terms of our diet and what we try to eat. So um, it's actually traveling is getting easier for me. I travel a lot. Eating on the road is, it's not that big a problem for me to just get, you know, the steak. No, I don't want the potato. Please don't bring the bread. Kind of no sides. Well, you got some bacon you can throw on there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they comp the bacon on the. It's like, well, dang, I'll do this a couple more times. Um, so and I am finding more and more people are aware of you could mention a keto diet and even carnivore or low carb. Certainly, Atkins is the one that most people would have heard of if they've heard of a low carb diet. So the information is there. Unfortunately, there's still people pushing back for whatever reasons,
Mm.
um, trying to say, oh, no cause hair to grow on the palms of your hands or something. Um, but slowly but surely, I think more and more people having personal experience, and then that ripples out, to a wider audience. So I'm actually quite optimistic, although every once in a while I'll get a little, down when I read, who's promoting lab meat now, or who's, the Impossible Burger or whatever that is. Um, One of the things that I try to, and this is a message for us all today, I think, is that I think people don't put enough value on their own personal health,
Mm.
and so they'll, think about, okay, well, I've heard this diet where I eat more animal products is good, but what about the environmental, whatever? And it's like that's the wrong conversation. I mean, we can deconstruct those and pull them apart, but we're talking about your health.
Mm.
If you're a father with children, the worst thing that can happen to your children is to lose you prematurely, right? Um, Value your health, and as we get better, we can then go about doing things to improve the world. And I do say that when you improve your own health, you are improving. You're doing it starting with yourself, which is really what we can do. And then we can go looking for other areas that we can make meaningful impacts in. A friend of mine says that Americans love the idea of saving by shopping. This idea, if we buy this product that's got this on the label or whatever, that somehow that's going to make a meaningful difference. And yeah, you can fill in the joke here for Americans, but um, maybe it would be better for us to learn what it is we should be eating, buy what's affordable to us, and go looking for projects for us to get involved with to make meaningful direct impact, rather than this idea of, becoming virtuous by the brand we buy. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Consumer capitalist driven society, yeah, we can save by what's the sort of thing like you can make a value and impactful choice, and it's all marketing, which of course is public relations, which actually began from propaganda. So that piece of knowledge is valuable to know that what you're being marketed to is propaganda.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's the comment or the title greenwashing.
Yes.
Right. Well, all you have to do is call it sustainable.
Yeah.
And okay, that's great. That just is a mantra that you can, like a mantle, you can pull on and now be virtuous. I was walking around our supermarket. There's a big thing about local food and what have you. The market, they have like the canned music in
Mm.
the the store, and then every once in a while there's an ad comes on, and so this ad is talking about our globally sourced ingredients. And I was going, did I just hear that? And so I waited until it came around in the rotation and you could hear, yeah, he said no, I'm sorry. I want the galactically sourced ingredients. I'm not going to settle for these global. Who thought that was a good idea? But then you can take a step back and who got us to call them vegetable oils?
Yes.
That's marketing. Because vegetables are good for you, so we'll call them vegetable oil. Corn oil, soybean oil. Those are industrial oils. It's canola. I mean, even olive oil or avocado oil is a fruit oil, right? I mean, it's not a vegetable. How did we come to equate fruits and vegetables as if they're equivalent? I mean, it depends, right? So we've been subject to a lot of marketing. It goes back many years. Dr. Fetke would have talked about the cereal industry and how that transformed breakfast and transformed what we thought was healthy. But of course, there was a heavy moral component to that. Same thing comes through to our dietary guidelines. A lot of the people involved in that are, in fact, out of that same faith community that Dr. Fetke and Fetke talk about. And on top of that, we have this environmental movement at the same sort of time in the United States in the 60s and 70s. And we have these catastrophists who are telling us, the world's going to end in 10 years or 12 years. And, we've got this population bomb, hitting population in India to a terrorist, to a national security threat.
Yeah.
And these people were making outlandish claims. They influenced policy on a number of levels, which impacted human lives in a very negative way. Women were unwittingly sterilized as part of our enlightened food aid programs because we needed to get them to implement population control before we give them food. And so we had women who were sterilized without their knowledge or consent. Now, I notice they tend not to be from the ruling class, which is interesting. They rarely are. So once again, the wealthy are able to continue their lives. They just impose these ideas on those who are of a lower stature in society. So there's a sort of social justice aspect of all this. But the people that were making the pronouncements that led to the policies that led to the uninformed sterilization, they've been wrong in virtually everything that they've ever said. And that's the history of the people that make these dire predictions. And you can go back and look at the history of them, which is amusing or depressing, depending on your mood at the time. Because the best one that I can come up with is the Great Horse Manure Crisis of 1893 or whatever the year was. It was in the 1890s. And horses were the major means of transportation within urban areas, and so New York City was a very unpleasant place because of the tons of manure and rivers of urine that were excreted by the transportation system at the time. And you had animal cruelty, mistreatment of animals. You had animals dying in the streets. It was a mess. People were getting injured by horses in the summertime when the manure in the streets dried out. It was pulverized and aerosolized and became airborne and would float into your window and settle onto your food. It was lovely. But it was okay, so it's good. And so some people said, if we don't find a solution to this in 20 years, manure is going to be to second story windows in London and New York, whatever. And so they convened a group of world experts came to New York, which takes a bit of doing at the time, right? So they're going to spend whatever time they need to solve this problem, and they quit in 3 days just because they said it's over. We see no solution.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
none of them could imagine the internal combustion engine. And within a relatively short period of time, the internal combustion engine had done away with that. Brought different problems. But we, from our perspective, only look at that. We tend to only look at that in a negative sense. We don't look at what that enables. I talk that your part of the world is far better about grassland farming. The attitudes tend to be far more progressive than they are in the United States. We're still using varieties that were released in the 1930s and 1940s, which is crazy. Especially when you think about all the advancements that have occurred in other aspects of agriculture. I have a picture of a stationary thresher. So you've got the steam engine. It's on wheels, but it's stationary at this point because you've got the big flywheel, and now you've got a big belt that goes off of that, and maybe 30 feet away, this belt connects to the thresher. So you got people walking around. This is an unguarded belt. I mean, it's just there. And so then you would go and bring the shocks of grain out of the field, and you would throw it through the thresher to separate the grain from the straw and the chaff, and then the straw they were piling up into a large stack. And so there's got to be 12 men working around this thing. You've got several horses that are drawing wagons or hauling off the sacked grain. All of that's renewable energy, of course. But it's hard work. It's not, there's a penalty to that. And modern power sources have freed people from having to do things that used to require people to spend their lives doing that. Okay, let's weigh those. Why do people move from the country to the city? There are reasons. And people who are overly romantic about living in the country, romance is fine. Don't confuse it with real life. We might need to sort of relook at some of those things. So, we in the United States can go into a store and pay less of our disposable income for food than anyone ever has anywhere. Now, there's a lot of stuff in there I wouldn't recommend eating, but we're still free to make the choice if we're informed properly. And you're probably familiar with Dr. Ted Naiman.
Yes, love him.
Yeah. So he's shared this enough times. He had a patient who, even though he's homeless and living in a tent, and yes, I'd like to know more about that, right? There's a story there.
Yeah.
But he ends up going to our local supermarket, buying the cheap 80/20 store brand hamburger, 80% lean, 20% fat. He buys eggs that are the cheap store brand. Often they're giving them away.
Oh, wow.
And he went to a secondhand store. He bought a used cast iron stove. He cooks on a butane stove. He's paying $6 a day for food and fuel. And that's what he eats. And in a year or whatever time it was, he dumped like 70 pounds of excess body weight, and he normalized his blood patterns.
That's not bad.
$6 a day, food and fuel. So if we know what it is, if we can get better informed about what it is we're trying to do, how to measure success, and give us effective options to follow, right? Not one size fits all, but let us know that, if our platelets are either high and we're low and our fasting glucose know the story of put it together however it fits for you.
Mm. I think one also thing you said is that the most valuable thing you can do is look after your health, because if you're not here, then especially if say you've got three children, then they're in dire straits. And it's something that I wanted to harp back to, because that's part of the reason why I love getting health professionals on this podcast, is because if you're a young bloke, especially, you need to look after yourself, because you're not only a resource to yourself, you're a resource to those people in your life. And if you're wasting resources, then you're not efficient, and then the people that you're influencing aren't efficient. And then if you're gone, they're left with this inefficient system to try and build back together.
Indeed, I mean, we have worth and value, and the being as healthy as we are capable of being, given the vagaries of fate and genetics and straight asteroid, then we're falling short in some way, right? If we're limiting ourselves in that way, and it's hard to say that when it's a matter of just complete ignorance, we just don't know how to do it. But then once we do learn to do better, then it's on us, because we can't. It's not the doctor's responsibility.
No.
It's our responsibility. And again, as you pointed out, I mean, we all belong to communities.
Mm.
The community is your family. It's the people in your area, and then we can blow that up. The cost of obesity-related disorder in the United States, I have one citation, says it's equivalent to 9.3% of GDP in the United States.
It's a lot of money.
1.7 trillion US dollars. All of farm game value, farm and ranch production, right, going off the property, that's 1% of GDP.
Giving the country 1% GDP.
That's the contribution.
Yeah, yeah.
So 1% of GDP is the farm game value of production. So that gives you an idea. There's an order of magnitude essentially difference.
Yeah.
And then somewhere halfway, 5.5, is the value of the food and agriculture industry, which would include the farm game.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're twice. So it's an enormous cost. It's an enormous burden. And it certainly seems to me that the case can be made that we need to be eating more animal products, not less.
Mm.
And then we can talk about the ecological advantage of producing ruminant animal products as opposed to others. And I'm not anti pork or poultry or fish. I enjoy them all. Human beings have eaten anything that hasn't eaten them first, so I'm willing to carry them on. But there are differing impacts, and so too often people talk about meat as if it's a uniform commodity, regardless of the species it comes from. And they talk about the impact of animal agriculture as if it's all equivalent. And they talk about agriculture's impact. The figures in the United States talk about greenhouse gas emissions because that's what tends to be on most people's minds, and is certainly the one that's being used to argue against animal products in the diet currently. But all of U.S. anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, all of agriculture, is somewhere around 9%.
Not 40.
No. At one point it was over 50, and then there was Livestock's Shadow that said it was 18 and a half, but then they had to admit that that wasn't a fair, and that's where we get this, it's more than transportation. which isn't true because they didn't do a fair apples to apples comparison. Um, it's now more like somewhere in the 14% range, and but in the U.S. where you have a developed economy, right, and 9% is agriculture's contribution. Animal agriculture is 4. Beef is about 2.
Mm.
So that's the best estimates that we have for actual greenhouse gas emissions. Then if you look at beef or any other ruminant animal, the knock on them is because of this fiber digestion process, the more fiber they're consuming and the lower the digestibility of that fiber, the more methane they belch out.
Mm.
So the higher the quality of the diet, the less they belch. But that methane is carbon that's coming from the food that they ate, and that food got its carbon through photosynthesis, taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, fixing it into dry matter that the animal ate. So now there's a couple things that we need to look at. One is that methane is going to break down within 10 years back to CO2.
Mm-hmm.
So it represents a slight thing of CO2, not an enrichment, is what happens.
Yeah, not an excess. Yeah.
Not an introduction of. So that's one thing. Number 2 is when a plant grows, say grass grows and through photosynthesis, about an equal amount of dry matter is produced below the soil surface as above the soil surface.
Wow.
So, and when you graze that plant, you don't eat the roots.
No.
So the roots are left in the soil. You also don't eat all of the plant, right?
Mm,
you take
right.
half, you leave a certain amount there, that's leaf litter, that stays.
Yeah.
So the amount that's fixed, the amount that's eaten is a small portion of the amount that was fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we graze, defoliate a grass plant, we can do it with cutting or grazing. The root system that's there is no longer needed to support that smaller plant. That plant now has to try to regenerate itself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a certain amount of sloughing of roots that takes place. So that's essentially a pulse of organic matter into the soil,
Mm-hmm.
which is carbon staying in the soil. So now we can think about this process, and it's not hard to at least imagine grazing animals as being carbon negative.
Mm.
So again, the story is a little bit more complex than we've been told. There's just a recent paper out of the upper Midwest that said, okay, we're going to look at finishing systems for beef in the upper Midwest. And they looked at 4 years of data of carbon in the soil. And then they applied some other factors because every region in the United States ended up benchmarking on the beef industry. So we now look at environmental impacts in those areas. So
Are these animals being finished on soil or on a pad? Or both?
They looked at both.
Yeah.
And what they said was when the animals are grazing,
Mm-hmm.
they have a higher rate of emission than when they're in the feedlot. That gets back to what I just said. It's a higher, it's a less fiber, higher digestibility diet, less methane is produced. But under the grazing management that they applied and measured over 4 years, the carbon that was sequestered in the soil more than compensated for the emissions of the cattle while they were grazing. Okay, so this is starting to look like a really good story now. Upper Midwest, you can't graze 12 months out of the year, so those cattle have to go somewhere. The more we look, the better the story gets, but we've got to get better at telling the story.
Yeah. And is that where you come in? You're sort of seeing like the backhand defense for the in terms of the health sphere, in terms of this low carbohydrate, even to the extent of Sean, this carnivore argument, who's he's battling in the spectrums. He's one end and it's being thrown 40% of emissions every single day, and that he's an evil person every single day. You sit at the back end defense of here's a little bit more nuance and knowledge and information about how this is not just an isolated production system. It's a cycling system, and it's a turnover system, and it's actually a sink. Do you feel that's how you've been brought into this sphere? Or?
Well, I guess when I graduated from university in '86 and joined the faculty at the local university. Left university in '92. Was out of agriculture, so it wasn't until 2011 that I came back into agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So that was 4 years essentially after I had started on this health journey. And along the way, I again was learning from all these people, but then I would hear things that just didn't align with what I knew from what I was trained to do.
Yeah.
And I'd like people to know that bit, because I think it's really important to know in the big scheme of things. So then I got the opportunity to introduce my agricultural tribe to the dietary and health message. And so I've been trying to introduce those tribes to each other, because I think that's how we'll make some real progress in this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to extend the conversation about sustainability from grazing through graveyard, from pasture to plot, right? I mean, if we're not
P2P.
But if the first quote that I came across was, if somebody's talking to you about sustainability and all they're talking about is if they're talking about environmental without talking about ecology,
yeah,
that's a red flag. If they're not also at the same time considering societal factors as well as economic factors, then we're not really having an honest conversation about sustainability. And there are these working groups around the world that are trying to get their hands around this issue of sustainability. And now I'm getting the opportunity to talk to them about, who informs the matters of what constitutes a healthy diet? Where is that information coming in? Do we have an opportunity to bring some of this newer information into the conversation, and how that might change things a little bit? So that's very much how I came in, and the role that I'm now in, of trying to get people that I trained with or was trained by to hear the same message that I'm convinced is transforming life.
Yeah, it's great that you say there that that it's not just passion to profit or paddock to plate, that it's plant to plot where you end up eventually. And the agriculture industry is, you mentioned Impossible Burger, they're constantly hearing from people from the likes of KPMG that are looking at the economics of agriculture and its influences and threats. But I think they also needed to take stock of the fact that there's a reason this is such a traditional industry, and they're not just putting food on the plate. They're, as you've just said, creating a sink for what the city who consume their product is producing. And there needs to be a lot more pride in this sector of the world. It feeds the world, and I think coming from New Zealand, I'm lucky in the fact that it's constantly harped on about, for our small population, we feed this vast array of people. And you see lots about the mental health of the agricultural sector and the pressures of the agricultural sector and rural communities falling apart. But I'd just love to instill some pride in what they're doing. And like you said, there's a lot of blood, sweat, effort, and many tears go into a day in agriculture. And so you can romanticize it, and I'm loving to see the rawness of many people that are going back to agriculture, and you see their first few days, they are in tears. They're like, I cannot believe this. It's hard work.
Well, indeed, and so there are a number of crises within the farming community, and you mentioned or alluded to some of them. And to the degree that well-nourished human beings can better stand the stress, right? And I go to farming, I go to a lot of agricultural conferences, and the stacks that are served are abysmal. And, the statistics that you think about the general population, they pretty well reflect the farming population. But we're talking about farming, we're talking about family enterprises, typically multi-generational.
Yes,
In
yes.
the United States, access to healthcare is an issue, and insurance is an issue for the business, for the employees that they may have. So I see this as a real opportunity, a real win-win for everyone. In part, just as you say, to try to put a better light on value of what you're doing in the livestock sector. The idea that we didn't evolve to eat meat, we evolved because we ate meat. That this goes a long way back in human history, and it's only been relatively recently in our history that we developed the crops that we have today. Although evidence of domestication of cattle and sheep and goats goes way back. And so this has been part of our experience. We, of course, have advantages today that would be undreamed of for great-grandfathers. But we owe them. I was just listening to a lecture that talked about the sacrifices that were made by previous generations so that we might stand where we are today. And that's part of the passion as well, is to give people a better sense of what's actually happening, and to let people know that if they're restoring their health on a solely animal product diet, or a diet that contains more than is good for us or the planet, you need not feel guilty for restoring your health on that kind of diet. One, your health is more important. Number two, you're not ruining the planet. And number three, you're not going to get cancer, heart disease, melt your bones, and weak morals, whatever the thought is that you're going to go through eating too much meat. There was, they've done some calculations. So there's this thing that they call externalities, right? So try to find additional things to lump and say, okay, well, we haven't considered this. Well, there's costs and benefits, and so people working within the beef industry in the United States have tried to look at those benefits to the environment of what happens. Things like fire reduction. If you don't raise grass, it grows up and becomes a fuel source. We have cataclysmic fires. We have the health of the watershed, so we have better water quality. We have wildlife that benefit and coexist with production systems. We have people that can go out and use forest or grassland that's being managed for recreation. So there's a certain amount of benefits. They come up with a figure of like 30 cents a pound. And that's before we've ever addressed metabolic illness. So what do you think it might be?
Yeah.
I mean, once we can start accurately weighing the benefits along with the costs, there are costs. There are things that we need to figure out how to do better. I talk about the goal of 2050, which is just 31 years from now, right? 2 billion people is the projection. 66% increase in demand for animal food. UN is saying now, one, we should be careful because that's probably based on their assumption of how much they should be eating, right? As opposed to maybe it should be bigger. It's a bigger increase. But we're losing the farm. A small amount of air surface is suitable for the production of those crops. Something like 4% of the whole Earth's surface. Meanwhile, rangeland, permanent pasture is something like 14%. And forest is another 10%. Or again, we can have some kind of a system. So almost by a factor of 8, if you put those last two together, we we have more land that can be in some kind of ruminant animal agriculture system. And, oh, by the way, they can also be reintegrated onto that cropland. And so we're seeing some very exciting things for people. After, say, the corn is harvested, they have a crop that covers that soil to protect it, to keep something growing in it, to prevent water erosion. And then animals can graze that later in season. I was just in Idaho a week or so ago, and where they would typically be feeding hay for 6 months, they were starting in November. They were getting to the point where they figured, yeah, we're probably going to have to start feeding hay next. So they've taken it from 6 months to 2. That's an enormous cost savings for them, and it also represents a tremendous opportunity for improving soil quality, improving productivity, water quality, all those issues on ground that's going to be producing commodity crops for this foreseeable future, but just a different way of doing it.
Yeah, that under sowing and no-till lifestyle, something. When I was doing a deer-knowledge course, it was, hitting home, and it probably goes to the fact that most deer farming is done on less than ideal hill country, and there's plenty about the way that you want to sow those crops, and where I'm from in Southland, it rains a lot. That's why it's good for growing grass, but at the same time, it also stops grass growth because not enough sun and there's too much rain. But again, it's about keeping the cows and the animals on the paddock and grazing them in a certain manner that water's a hot topic in New Zealand at the moment, making sure that you're not influencing the water. You've got these riparian plantings and all those sorts of things, which again adds to the ecology of the world. And another P2P, there's a lady on Instagram called Piglet to Plate. She's one of these people that's just gone into farming. She's on a goat and pig farm, and she was out in the paddock somewhere in the UK, and they've got all these old established trees along the fence lines, and there was birds everywhere, and green grass, and happy goats out in the paddock. And I guess it's the concern of urbanization of the world is we're so far away from that, and when all we see is a slaughter board and say this is the reality of farming. It's not the reality of farming. It's not the reality of the livelihood of animals, and farmers are every day working towards keeping those animals alive. It's the value of those animals. It's the livelihood of what they do and feeding them. And like you say, grass-based living, that they're growing grass to support in agriculture.
And when I was in Sydney at the International Grassland Conference 6 years ago, I listened to a gentleman talk about dairy farming in Tanzania.
Wow, yeah.
And so, only a few cows, typically managed by women, the men are somewhere else, cut and carry.
Yep.
Right? Their animals are in confinement for their own good, because there's stuff out there that would eat them. So that kind of made me, kind of take a relook at the realities of how we manage animals. But again, if some of these operations have been in business for a couple of generations, the animals are a multi-generation result as well. They're the product of breeding decisions that grandfather might have made when he bought, an Angus bull from some source and began improving the cows that he had. People don't understand that just as stress is bad for humans, it's bad for animals. And the same things happen, and if you don't, it's as foolish to manage with antibiotics and try to overcome bad conditions and bad nutrition in animal agriculture. It's as bad as trying to do it in human health and welfare. The same things apply. And margins are tight, and it's hard to make profit, and you don't make profit from stressed, poorly nourished animals. It's just not going to happen. Nor from land that you abuse, and the land. Talking to some people the other week and saying, you know, people look at farmers and ranchers as if they're these extractors, right? And they don't understand that this is my inheritance from my father, and I hope to pass it on to my children. I'm trying to make sure that I leave it better than I got it. Um, and when I have a chance to talk to people that, you know, we're the fourth generation on this land, I'm just going, what is that like? You know, I can't imagine what that would be like. And I think a lot of people in modern America don't understand either, because we've become so global and rootless, that we don't have that sense of place and community in that way. So, and the other side that should be mentioned is many times people end up eating this product themselves and feeding it to their family. And so, you know, if they weren't convinced it was safe and wholesome and healthful, right, would they do that? Right. So these are people that know a lot about what they're doing, and they continue. So again, just trying to get people to, what is it, the secret of enlightenment is to like them. That's it. So we get overwrought about things that I'm not sure are that important. We get very certain about things that are very poorly documented. We fall sway to yet another narrative that promotes a product. Oh, that's a coincidence. That you know, benefits someone and not necessarily us. And we have something in front of us that I think would be so impactful if we could get more people to follow. We really should take a hard look at how we talk about it, how we promote it, what other messages we attach to it. So the visit to Brazil got me wondering. I mean, what would be appropriate to those communities that I was being introduced to? What would be an appropriate form of that? Affordable, accessible, appropriate to their culture and experience. One of the advantages of all the carbohydrate food is their shelf stable. They don't need refrigeration. You can grab it, eat it on the go. You don't have to cook it. Well, what would be appropriate? What would be, again, the appropriate kind of form? And then there's all kinds of other things that kind of get interesting too. I got introduced to the whole. I mentioned earlier the difference between crude protein and true protein, and it's a significant difference, and it speaks to the value of animal products in the diet. But when we take so meat now, we understand has a much higher value than beans do, as far as a source of indispensable amino acids that are highly digestible. But if we take meat and we process it to make bologna, or we ferment it to make salami, or we dry it to make jerky or biltong, right? Or we cure it to make bacon, we actually increase the digestibility of those amino acids. We can take the lower value cuts and we can improve their protein digestibility score by processing them. Now, we've been taught that processed meats are bad. Well, maybe they're not. Maybe it's actually, again, increasing the value of that resource. They're also pretty tasty, so
yeah, that's something I've become mildly obsessed with, is prosciutto and marchetta and all those sorts of things. And I can't wait to get my hands on a venison leg and give it a go. I'll probably stuff it up a few times, but yeah, I want to give it a go. One of the things I really want to hone in on is you said about how farmers are seen as extractors. But if you look at a balance sheet of a farmhouse, and you go to a farmhouse and you see a tractor that's been there for 40 years that keeps getting repaired, it's because of those inputs. You look at their balance sheet; it's their inputs. And whenever you go to purchase a farm, and I've been looking at it, how far away I am from purchasing a farm, what you get is the last 4 years of what's gone into that land, what's gone into that soil, what plant is there in terms of things to use, what sheds and stuff like that, when was the fencing done, what are the fences like, it's actually all about the inputs that make such an amazing product and making that efficient.
Yeah, and somebody said that nature doesn't give us the environment we need to flourish.
Yeah.
We make the environment we need to flourish by applying, right, inputs. That's and the environment is, nature is not a safe place for us. We make it safe with our technology, with our inputs.
Yeah.
And that's, again, people have this romantic view of nature right up until the time they have to strangle the mountain lion with their bare hands. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, amazing.
Jeez. Wow. Yeah, so somebody was saying, that I guess he's Taekwondo or some kind of martial arts, but I think this is true. I think they said that in his school or whatever, somebody had talked about using it to defend yourself from animal attack.
Yeah.
Now, most of the application is, defending against human. This idea of, well, maybe we ought to spend a little time thinking about, a dog or some animal that, could cause you great harm if you were out there without, Mr. Remington or Mr. Winchester or Mr. Browning. So in any case, yeah. I'm fascinated by the worldwide reality of what's going on.
Yeah.
And this technology is amazing that we can talk. And I think that's for advantage because I don't think gatekeepers can keep. They can stand their post, but the walls have been breached on the other side.
Yeah.
They're unnecessary. They're still, doing their mischief, and they're still going to be around for a while. But if somebody wants to, they can access all the information they need to convince themselves. And part of my role is to just introduce people to some of that information, because people aren't aware of something called meat science, for example. The people that study muscle formation and function from a meat science perspective. Or they're not familiar with the things that I've been trained in. Likewise, I'm not a medical doctor. Nobody should take anything that comes out of my mouth as medical advice. But I am happy to introduce people and some things that they can read to become educated consumers of healthcare. So it's an exciting world that we're coming at. It's a challenging one. But I am optimistic and hopeful. And I think that we early on talked about the value of hope. That's an enormously powerful motivator, especially for people who have just sort of experienced that progressive decline. Who can all of a sudden see some of the things that Dr. Unwin or Dr. Fedke or Dr. Naiman report from real life, free living human beings who, just by changing what they buy at the supermarket and making some really pretty minor lifestyle changes, are able to affect this tremendous change. I think that's the best good news, and then the news that I can bring to them is, the agriculture that produces the meat and dairy products, of whatever species you're interested in. Ruminant animal agriculture is the key to sustainable agriculture.
Wonderful. And so when people want to, they hear this and they want to hear more and continue to hear more, where do they go?
They can find me on Twitter. They can find me on Instagram. Both places are grass-based.
Yeah.
You can find me on YouTube by my name, Peter Ballerstedt. Lots of videos. I get interested in kinds of things, so you'll find lots of stuff there. I try to keep it organized, so look for the playlists and find your way through those. But lots of the talks that I've given have been recorded and are available. Several podcasts as well. And then you can find me on Facebook at Grass-Based Health. And then you can also email me at peter.ballerstedt@gmail.com.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And is there anything to sum it up? You've done a great job summing it up anyway, but is there anything to leave us with, I guess?
Yeah, a steak a day keeps the doctor away.
Brilliant. Brilliant. We'll wrap it up there, Peter. I think we could talk forever. And if you're ever in New Zealand or probably New Zealand by the time you get back there, be sure to reach out and hopefully we can meet up.
I'd love to do that. Thank you for the opportunity, and I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, and likewise, if I ever go to hunt those mountains in Oregon, I'll be sure to try and visit you.
Perfect.
Lovely. Thanks very much, mate.
Cheers.